Hello, welcome everyone to this panel, Post-Hierarchy Strategies of Living and Working Collectively. My name is Daniela Silvestrin, and I'm part of the curatorial team behind the Collective Practices program that, after 9 months of exploring forms, methods, and questions related to collectivity, is now coming to an end, sadly. This now is the third and last session of today's topic called collective efforts, within which we wanted to look at methods of collectively relating and organizing our interactions within contexts of working, living, and becoming active for common causes. In the first 2 sessions today, we could hear a lot about the concept of solidarity in both theory and practice. And in this session, we will now go deeper into both theoretical reflections and practical examples of the concept and notion of the collective as a specific form of working and or living together. My guests now for this panel are Mauff, Christian Cherene, and Marte Roel, who are both a part of the collective BeAnother Lab. And also we have Lulu Obermayer from the Kunsthaus KuLe in Berlin. The first to present his research will be Luis, who is an activist and cultural producer invested in self-organizing, kinship, and the creation of spaces for emancipation and deconstruction, and whose research focuses on power dynamics within collective practices. In his work, Luis is exploring possibilities for emancipatory culture of self-organizing by collecting methods and fragments from and with people in the field. Looking much forward to what he will be telling us. And after his talk, there will be Christian and Marte, who will tell us about their experience as co-founders and parts of the art collective BeAnother Lab. And BeAnother Lab is an international interdisciplinary collective dedicated to investigate the relationship between identity and empathy, attempting to communicate, understand, and expand subjective experience through embodiment and telepresent experiences. Last but not least, we will hear Lulu, who is an artist working with performance, opera, theater, and choreography. And Lulu is part of the Kunsthaus KuLe, which is short for Kunst und Leben, which means art and life. And KuLe is a non-profit cultural organization located in a building in the center of Berlin that was originally squatted by a group of art students from the former West Berlin shortly after the fall of the wall, and then was turned into a community of creative practitioners and a living project. And based on these presentations and inputs, we will be discussing and reflecting on collectivity in cultural and other work situations by looking at what aspects and challenges of collective work are at the center of successively working and living in collective structures. We will reflect on how to deal with personal responsibility and trust in collective processes, and if and how traditional relations of dominance and informal hierarchies can or should be overcome in what could be interpreted as post-hierarchical structures of collective work and sharing of responsibilities. So after this introduction of our topic, I also want to warmly invite all of those who are watching to send us questions through the chats on YouTube or Facebook, or also the Telegram group we set up. And this all being said, I hand over the word to Luis, and who will be starting to give us input. Welcome, Luis.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, and thanks Daniela and everyone involved for setting up this program. In the next 10 to 15 minutes, I want to give a short introduction to my research on informal hierarchies and principles and methods which can help dealing with those informal hierarchies. My interest in hierarchy critical organizing started a few years ago when I was involved in different collectives. And also, although there were no formal hierarchies, power dynamics still played a big role, and naming and dismantling those hierarchies was extremely difficult for everyone involved. My approach in terms of research is to connect theory on power with knowledge from the practices of my interview partners, as well as my own. In terms of theory, I won't go in depth, but I want to name the concepts that are the base for my understanding of power. And there's Foucault worked on the relationship of power and knowledge and how they are used as a form of social control. And for Foucault, power is he sees power as productive and not exclusively negative and repressive. So with his understanding of power, there can't be an outside of power. Coherent feedback to theorists who worked on the specific topic of organization and power follow his understanding and say, well, they would say that power is a fundamental aspect of every social relationship and represents a daily mechanism of social existence. So power is not only used in organizations, power also always plays a role in any other relationship, as in family and between friends. They also go a bit beyond that and look at the connection of individual autonomy and power, and say making power disappear basically means nothing more than making the autonomy of the actors disappear. I find this quite important because if we want to have a critical attitude towards hierarchies and collective structures, we should therefore not aim at abolishing power, but at balancing the power with the group, as power is necessary for preserving the autonomy of the individuals. While formal hierarchies are more or less transparent for every actor, because everyone knows where they are in that order and with which responsibilities, this is very different within informal hierarchies. Informal hierarchies are all those more or less constant power structures which have not been formally specified or agreed upon and are therefore non-transparent in their essence. And when speaking, it is important to note that they consist of different life realities and social positions. So differences with regard to categories such as class, race, gender, age, and physical and mental capabilities, and of course their intersections. Those social constructed positions, as well as the systems of oppressions which are connected to them, shape any relationship. Therefore, they necessarily need to be in the focus when we look at collective practices. And our forms of hierarchies that I will speak of now are inevitably shaped by the involved people's positions and privileges. This is also something Bourdieu considers when he talks about the habitus of a person. In Bourdieu's concept, the habitus is described as the basic attitude of a person towards the world and themselves. These structures of thought and behavior determine the possibilities and limits of a person's thinking and acting, and determine what a person is confident about, which behavior comes naturally to the person, what is difficult to imagine, and what seems completely impossible. If we look at the context of art and artistic creation, I think the habitus plays an even bigger role. Like in every other field, the creative individual is trying to survive in neoliberal capitalism. But this is also something I would be interested to hear your thoughts on later. So when we look at the characteristics of the habitus, it becomes clear that that constructions such as whiteness and gender strongly determine it. The habitus of individuals and how they are reflected in collectives has a big effect on everyone in the group. It determines sympathies, alliances, or if you get somewhere with your proposals or ideas. So instead of thinking of the habitus as something coincidental or simply in someone's nature, we have to name the constructs that are at its base. Other types of informal hierarchies, such as knowledge hierarchies, which can originate from any specific knowledge which is relevant for the collective structure, or information hierarchies that result from access to information and are reinforced by the control over sharing or not sharing that information. And then there is things like I would call experience hierarchies that describe the different positions of group members, like you all have old and new group members, and old group members know the group quite well, have had already a lot of discussions, and can tend to say things like, we have always done it this way, or this just doesn't work. Also, we have already discussed this 100 times. And then there are things like activity and presence hierarchies. If there's a big difference between different actors in the amount of time spent on the collective project, for example. And then also something really important for collective structures, because they have a high demand on communication and mediation of points of view, the communication skills in total. There are different principles and methods that can help dealing with informal hierarchies, and I will name some that have always come up when interviewing people in that field. Hierarchy critical work should be understood as an ongoing process of confrontation, struggle, and engagement. Because if there is no outside of power relations, then the question is not whether power relations exist, but only how and in what way. It doesn't need the one decision, but a conscious, active, and continuous handling of informal hierarchies of a group. So, for example, if a group sees itself as hierarchy-free and no process is formulated, it can lead to the tabooing of power relations. So you also need a specific agreement on reflecting power structures within the group. When can dynamics like that be problematized, and to also note those considerations? Only then people within the collective structure can really refer to them if they want to address a certain aspect or relation. Otherwise, it gets quite difficult. Hierarchy critical work should also take place in the individual confrontation with one's own position of power and one's own privilege. So to ask oneself, what role do I take in the power dynamics of the group? Can I assert myself well with my concerns? And to reflect on one's own speaking behavior, for example, in group situations, plenary situations. You can ask yourself, how often do I speak and how loudly? Have others spoken little or not at all? And what does this have to do with my speaking behavior? And also, an important question is maybe, am I generalizing my opinion? This can lead to withdraw and surrender tasks and responsibilities, reduce knowledge hierarchies through supporting knowledge transfer, and so on. But the whole thing about privilege also includes learning from the ongoing discourses around it. And then there's the role of responsibilities and how they are distributed, because in formal hierarchies, they are quite visible and clear. It's visible responsible for what and who's not. And in a collective structure, there's no automatic distribution of responsibilities. The members need to organize them themselves, which means they can transfer the responsibility for certain things to individuals or smaller groups and decide which decisions or tasks are under joint responsibility. Responsibilities and rights can then be distributed equally, taken over by a person who just wants, or rotate among everyone. So every group can decide between organizing around the idea of more around the idea of rotation or inclination, which in German I would say then Prinzip der Neigung. And I would say that an unequal distribution of responsibilities always creates hierarchies. The performance collective Shishi Pop wrote about collective work. Working collectively also means, how do I make myself replaceable? Sovereignty does not consist in being the best at something, but in seeing oneself as part of a community. For me, that can mean to turn away from the principle of becoming irreplaceable as a forced principle of the labor market and to make oneself replaceable, which can mean then to unlearn individualist and capitalistic values and instead to trust in the community. So can traditional relations of dominance and informal hierarchies be overcome in a truly post-hierarchical structures? I'm not sure. I guess it's a process of approach, and no collective structure can exist detached from the systems of domination and oppression which they are embedded. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thanks a lot, Luis, for this introduction into a lot of theoretical concepts and thoughts behind also your work, especially. Now we would go deeper into practical experience, starting with Christian and Marte, who will talk about their experience of founding and now running, being part of BeAnother Lab for several years.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniela. Thank you, Luis. And thank you also so much for the whole program of collective practices. I think both Christian and myself have been engaged in different parts of the program, and it's been really an inspiring program. So I want to start by saying that I think Luis just touched on pretty much everything that we go through on our everyday practice. I think Christian would agree, and it's like really well articulated. So maybe we can go with a presentation just as a visual backup to support our conversation. And just one moment. Can I see the presentation? Should I see it? No. Okay, good. So I thought just to start, to begin, I thought I'd speak a little bit about what we do, what we do, let's say, externally more than the internal functioning. And I thought it's actually really interesting that what we do externally really is a reflection of our internal functioning. So I want to introduce three concepts of what we do, and these are ownership, agency, and location. But these are rather related to the sense of being a body, of being an embodied entity, of feeling that you have a body. And I actually like more the term of self-identification instead of ownership. I think it's less charged in many ways, and it's also I think it reflects more the nature of the feeling of this identifying with a body or with something. And I will talk about these concepts a little bit in the context of our work, and might interrupt me at any point. Maybe we can go to the slide. So we have been doing just almost as in, I mean, it started with this idea of creating a machine to be another, a system that would allow you to embody someone else, to feel what it is like to be another real person with that has a personal narrative, a story, a body that is experienced in a certain way. So this is what we created, and this is how we started looking into the literature in psychology and neuroscience and about what it is to have a body. And this is where I draw these concepts that I presented from. So this is, let's say, our formal practice to have people exchange bodies. That's at least how it started, but really trying to create the space for alternative dialogue that goes beyond the verbal, but that is more embodied and effective and mutual. So yeah, that's our practice. But of course, internally, the functioning is quite... it's not as easy to reflect these worldviews and this what we want to do in our work internally, and I think for many of the reasons that were just presented by Luis. And maybe you can go ahead, Christian, with the next slide.
I guess this is just a bit of the background of the project. It works by, I guess we normally consider our senses to be quite discrete and function independently of each other, but generally they're always mixing to make sense of the world, and that's the sort of domain in which we play on the psychophysical level. And then in addition to that, there's the level of narrative as well. So we work with different individuals and different communities in forms of storytelling and narrative creation to develop these experiences. So how that all plays out is very much negotiated in a hyper-local way. The partnerships are often quite tense because there's different actors, whether they're institutions or grassroots collectives or individuals or communities, research institutions, public-facing cultural institutions as well. We often find ourselves kind of in the middle of that space, trying to ostensibly make a project that's meant to be as horizontal as possible and generate different kinds of activities or interventions with that focus. And it's tricky for the reasons that Luce was talking about, and other external factors as well that are imposed on that. But I guess it's a lot to do with the expectations that people bring with them, whether it's ourselves or the people we're working with. And I guess that's also related to the experience, in terms of you play with the expectations. You expect to, if you see the body that you're in being touched and you feel it, you expect that to make sense, and you expect, or if you move your hand and you see it move, it's working as expected. And we normally intervene in the realm of this action and perception, and so also thinking about how that manifests itself in our collective practice as well internally. It's very interesting to actually hear Lewis speak about all of this, because we've not been very good at theorizing anything or implementing any theory into what we're doing, so much as it's an emergent practice that we've developed over the years in combination with everybody that we've collaborated with on the project. And out of that, we've tried and failed to theorize about it. So it's a good exercise to be able to find these opportunities to talk about it in this context with others that are similarly engaged. Marte, I hand over to you to continue there.
So yeah, I mean, I think we're going to go back and forth between the internal and the external functioning. And when I say external, right now I refer to what we do formally. And this example is the rubber hand illusion, which many of you might have seen, where we have an experimenter, and really drawn from a scientific study. And we have an experimenter stroking the rubber hand of a participant. And the participant's own hand is actually hidden from his point of view. And as the experimenter strokes the rubber hand, he also strokes the participant's own hand. And we can play it to see what happens. Oop, not sure that worked. Maybe not. Anyways, I can just mention it. After a while, after this stroking for a little bit, the participant feels that the rubber hand is their own hand. And we drew a lot of literature from science, replicate this in an artistic setting, and really take it to the farthest that we could imagine, with putting another person with the complexity that entails. And the project was, I mean, a lot of what we've mentioned before, but we can go to the next slide, and trying to blur this boundary between self and other, between us and them. And so it's really interesting that while this is what we do externally and in practice, we often replicate many of the systemic problems, or nature, if you want to call it, internally. And it's really a struggle that we go through, and it's really great to have a conversation about it in this setting. So we can go to the next slide, actually. And I guess now we can talk a little bit about our organizational practice. And the way I thought about it is, first I will explain you three aspects that I should have explained before, but about this feeling that you are a body, that you have a body, that you are a body that can act, And at least in the scientific literature, these three concepts are ownership or self-identification, which is really feeling that your body is your own, that your hand is your own, versus a table or a glass or something that is not part of your own body. Then there is agency, the capacity to act, the feeling that you can actually act and have a consequence in the world. And the self-location or location is a feeling that you are present in a particular location in space at a given time, and in the present, basically. And I think these three pillars of what it is to feel embodied can really take us to explain how we work internally as well. And I guess we can start with the sense of agency a little bit, go to the next slide, and I guess Christian can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe the next slide again. Anyway, to talk about agency, I guess the way the system works is it only really works if there's a shared sense of agency. Since we're routing people's sensory perception, what they're seeing and what they're feeling to each other, then they have to move in sync to be able to actually, for the experience to work and have the effect that we're intending. So that's also seems to kind of be how we manage to do stuff ourselves. While we might have very different views about how things are meant to happen, we have to entrain a certain way of agreeing upon things and negotiating these power dynamics that are there. So trying to find ways of having shared agency. I guess what Luis was talking about as well, that in losing agency, at least in our experience, that's what really creates the conflict there. So as you're saying, in terms of not removing agency because you remove power, or remove power entirely because you remove agency, trying to find ways of moving together. I mean, very simply, like something that for years I was very embarrassed about, and now is like the best thing ever from an organizational perspective, at least on our end, is that we use like one common email address to manage this project, and the project is distributed in loads of different countries. None of us, for the most part, live in the same city even, or the same country. Our activities take place in third countries again that none of us live in. And somehow, by having it all in the email, we're able to all have a certain transparency with each other, and there's this level of, and it engenders this kind of trust as well between the group. We can also supplant people's role in terms of managing projects quite seamlessly from an external perspective, as there's the common knowledge base and how that's been going. So things like that blur this kind of like who's responsible as well for things, has become, I guess, something that we've relied on, has turned out to be the only way we've actually managed to kind of push forward the project at the level we have, I think, in a certain way. At least I'm a fan of things that I used to perceive as a weakness as being a strength in a certain way. So there's not really like a cohesive vision, I suppose, in terms of like something that we agree on, that we have like entirely figured out. It's more like insect eyes. There's a very composite view of different ways of looking at the same thing, different forms of knowledge, different backgrounds that everybody comes from as well, and trying to find a way of valuing and translating between these different perspectives so that we can get a more cohesive view of what we're involved in, how we're doing things, and how to listen and be sensitive to that. And I think that's, I guess, another part of it. I guess if you want to talk about listening a bit, Marte, or whatever else is on the slide.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I guess the next slide is the one about agency that we sort of skipped, but we can go and yeah, I mean, I think pretty much everything that is here on this the shared versus agency, and what Christian and Luis mentioned before, and how this relates to power, the implicit and explicit extensions, intentions, expectations, and attitudes that we have as a collective, and how these shift through time. We have been a group since 8 years, I think. Or even this year it will be 9 years or something like that. So it's, I mean, definitely we have changed. No, some of us have families now, which wasn't the case a few years ago. The group has grown; it has been reduced. There have been collaborations that we haven't been able to sustain. So there are very important shifts. And then I guess this relationship, which was the last point of this slide, between ownership and agency, is an interesting one. And I think there are many layers about this. I skipped sorry, Christian, I skipped the listening part, but maybe you can go back to it in a moment. But I realized that this self-identifying with the project, with the common view, with the practice is an important part of, I would say, the identity of everyone participating in the team. So this is I think the moment that we don't identify anymore with BeAnother Lab, with our collective, then we might be able to leave. But this is an important cohesion that we have, and I think for all of us, it's an important aspect of our identity, that if we were to lose it, we would find ourselves losing a very, like a limb. It's an important aspect of who we are, and I think negotiating this, what it means to be ourselves, is something that is very implicit, but also very important. And yeah, so I wanted to mention that, and it's obviously linked to agency. Maybe Christian, you want to go back to the
Yeah, I see we
listening.
have. I think we're just about to run over time here, so I'll just wrap up, I guess. Yeah, I suppose in terms of identification, it's more identifying, I think, not with something that's a fixed idea or a fixed entity, but more a way of doing something and a trajectory and a way of negotiating that trajectory together with others. And I think that's what we have in common. So you identify almost with something that's in tension and something that's changeable. So it's less about identifying with a fixed point or a fixed idea or something. But I guess we're kind of over time now, but unless you want to say anything else, Marte, we could, I suppose, just continue the conversation, threading it through others afterwards.
Yeah, I guess just to wrap up, I mean, it's important, the aspect about listening, both externally and internally, is super important. And while it's a pillar of our work, or so we argue, internally, it's sometimes very difficult to listen to each other. And this is really surprising. I think it's related to the last topic, which is location. No, we are the only times that we meet is when there is an event, or when we are online for a Zoom meeting. That, like, this new normality has been happening for us since 8 years, pretty much, that all our interactions happen online. And this is not really a space that we have found to be particularly good for affect, or we have not managed to do it in a way that sometimes we do, sometimes we manage, but it's difficult if you don't share a coffee with a colleague, or everyday situations that are important. And yeah, I mean, I guess just to wrap up, unless Christian wants to say something else, I think what we wanted to put out with this presentation is that we want to find some coherency, or that what we do in practice externally and in our works and in facilitating these spaces and merging identities is something that we have also attempted to do somehow internally in our cooperations.
Okay, thank you very much for this introduction into your work, both like in terms of content and also in terms of structures. Maybe I can just add that or give as a background context. I came across your work through the project that you mentioned, Machine to Be Another, and I was fascinated by this project when I discovered it and got in touch with I am blanking on the name now, one of the others in the collective, and it was clear from the beginning that making such a project needed a lot of different skills, probably, and different knowledges coming together. And the more I engaged with BeAnother Lab as a collective, the more I discovered like the different people and the ways that you work together, meaning that you're not living in the same city, that there's a group of about 10 people distributed not only within one country, but throughout the world in different continents and time zones, and not having a specific base or a specific place where actually there's your kind of home base or studio or whatever. And so I got more and more fascinated, not just with your artistic work, but actually how such a collaboration can function and can be made productive over many years, while you all have individual artistic and research practices as well. So that was a little bit the background why I was keen on having you here tonight with us. And on the other hand, now handing over to Lulu, I also thought there are, especially in Berlin, I know a couple of collective efforts and collectives that are very much bound to the city through houses or project spaces or other ways that kind of confine them or kind of locate them very specifically in this place, and where there's not only the collaborative work but also a collective life in place. And maybe this being said, I hand over to Lulu, and I'm curious to hear what you can tell us.
Hi, everyone. I am not so used to speaking to the ether. I usually like to be live in front of people, so bear with me. Thank you, Daniela, for the invitation to speak on this panel tonight. And also thank you to the previous speakers for their really inspiring inputs. My preparation for tonight was quite a pleasure, because it was also an invitation down my memory lane, and I would like to share my reflections with you. Before I begin talking about KuLe, Kunst und Leben, Art and Life, I would like to introduce myself, because living at KuLe is a very personal experience. So my name is Lulu, and I am originally from Munich, and I am 1 year older than KuLe, and I've been making performances for over 10 years. I got involved in the theater world because I liked being and working with people, and because the theater is about coming together, and it deals with the potentiality and the envisioning of another world. So 6 years ago, I moved to Berlin to study in a master's program called Solo Dance and Authorship at Hochschulübergreifendes Zentrum für Tanz. And my first encounter with KuLe was through a peer who took me along to a presentation by Mart Dietz in the context of the 25th year anniversary celebration in August 2015. At the time, as lots of people who arrive in Berlin and are just arriving or in the process of arriving, I was looking for a new home, and so I became interested in KuLe and its history. And later that evening, I was given a tour around the house. And what really impressed me that night was the unexpected silence. Downstairs was a party going on, but the kitchen and the rest of the house were completely quiet and deserted. And Mars brought me up to the roof, and we looked out onto the skyline of Berlin. And when I looked down onto the street, down to the party, I knew that I wanted to live here. And as I said, solo, my artistic work was and still mostly is solipsistic. I am alone in the process. I do work with other people. Theater can never be done by oneself. But the way how I work and the way how I am with my work is quite by myself. So to counterbalance that practice, I wanted to live with many people. At the time, my maximum experience of living with other people were not more than 6. And so I was ready for the challenge to be confronted with about 20. And also, not to forget, the idea of having access to a theater and a gallery in my own home was very attractive to me. So a month later, I attended the plenum, where I introduced myself. I was very nervous. I brought a dragon flower and a bottle of wine, and we ate together. I met most of the people, chatted with them a bit, and then plenum started. Plenum. What is a plenum? So once a month, we gather as a group, and we talk together about how we live together and how we work together. We ring the bell, and when most people have arrived, we start. So that night, the first top on the list was the garbage bins in the entry area. And then it was my moment to shine. It felt like an audition. I was asked about my biography and my work, my expectations of living in a community, and why I wanted to live here, and if I was ready for a construction site. I was. I wanted to commit, and I received a few hours afterwards, that I could move in by the end of the month. Since then, 5.5 years have passed. Kunsthaus KuLe is an artist house in Berlin Mitte. It's a front and a back house, 4 floors, a cellar, a ground level with the theater and the gallery, an attic, and roof. It was squatted in 1990 by a group of art students. And I have been giving the door handle by Urs, who belongs to the founders of KuLe. So I am keeping, well, I'm caring for the door handle for the occupation. And the entire house was renovated in the scheme of Selbsthilfe between 1994 and 1998. And in 2016, Ursula Maria Berzborn and Steffi Weismann published this book about the 25 years of working and living together. And I can show you some images. It compiles many, many essays about living together and working together and people's experiences and reflections. This was during the construction. And there's actually a picture of Mars's performance here, and I am just on top of it with a picture of my own work. So we are documented together on the same page. It is lovely. So right now we are 20 residents living currently in this house, and we are legally organized as a nonprofit organization. On the ground level, we have a gallery and a theater, which we run collectively, but due to the pandemic, those doors are closed and will be closed for the near future. In August last year, we quietly turned 30. We celebrated with homemade ravioli made by Pepe, one of the founding members of KuLe. And we really hope that in the soon future, we'll be able to celebrate this proud anniversary of alternative living and working together. Over the last 3 decades, more than 500 people have lived in this house. And uncountable people have performed here and exhibited their work, maybe worked in the workshop, visited the house, contributed in so many ways, and have been really integral to the collective elephant memory of KuLe. What I love about KuLe is that it's both a communal and also a very highly individual experience. So when you ask somebody, what is KuLe, it will be answered differently by whoever you'll be asking. And whoever has lived here at different times. And that is, in my eyes, the miracle about KuLe. It is something that deeply touches us. And when we come together in a plenum, we establish the group. It's a very archaic process, and it's very deep and somewhat pre-verbal. I would even call it a ritual. It really does something to you, and it will never leave you cold, and it might leave you hot. And we need to deal with this, and we need to vent about it, and we need to process about it, and we need to digest it. I often, for example, can't sleep after a plenum, and the next day I will wake up with a plenum hangover in the morning. The only thing we can do is we can offer our experiences as our truth, and we will always constitute ourselves within our gatherings, and then we disperse into our low groups or in our individualisms. My housemates have witnessed me in my development and my growth, and as I have been present to theirs. In 2019, in December, I tore my ACL whilst dancing, and I couldn't walk. So I temporarily moved into the kitchen level, which is the kitchen. We share one kitchen together, and we have 2 living rooms. So I was living there for a week. And I experienced that the KuLe kitchen is open 20 hours a day. Only between the hours of 3 a.m. and 7 a.m. the kitchen was empty. And I was cared for, I was fed, I was entertained, I was helped, and I'm so grateful how we can show up for each other. And I don't want to imagine what my experience would have been like if I had been by myself. For a really long time, I thought I knew what KuLe is, and only recently have I realized that perhaps I don't. And yeah, and that's the beauty, and that's the core about KuLe. It is always changing, and it will continue to change. It really depends on the constellation of people, the group dynamic, the vibe amongst people at a certain time. And I believe that KuLe needs to be in flux, in movement. It really lives from the energy, and so the energies need to continue the dance. KuLe was a very different place before the pandemic hit us last year. Professionally, a lot of artists who live here travel often, so we have subletters and guests who stay temporarily at the house. And the residents would host events downstairs, or people from the outsides, and friends would come over for dinners and parties. The house is very much alive, and we only have one kitchen. So the question really is, how do we keep distance from each other right now? Since March, our kitchen has been closed to non-house members, yeah, it has become quite quiet. We have been like KuLe navel gazing, and I believe that living here has always been a sort of act of resistance, but over the last year, it has really been proven to us that we really long for assembly, and also I think what's a big topic for a lot of people, to have access to space, and we still have both. It might be a little bit dangerous, but we try to take care as much as possible, and it is and has been an absolute privilege to live with so many people. And I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Lulu. That kind of made me really want to come and visit KuLe and see the space alive. I hope it will be possible not too far in the future. Yeah, so we have a lot of different inputs now, and I actually would like to start off the conversation with the title of our panel, because I kind of been a bit polemically maybe called it post-hierarchy. And I would, maybe we can go into a little bit of the juicy details of your individual experiences in that sense. So what are the hierarchical structures that either BeAnother Lab or at KuLe are in place? How were they set up? How do they work? And maybe going into the direction of actually asking, do you think there is something like a post-hierarchical need, or a need for post-hierarchy structures? And if so, why or why not? Yeah, so maybe we can start from there. Maybe Lulu, you want to already start by adding a little bit on the structures, the internal working structures of KuLe?
What was it called again? Yeah, so in terms of hierarchies, I have a hierarchy problem. But of course, also in our house, there is something like a hierarchy. I think the most prevalent hierarchy is how long you have lived here. As Louis said in his presentation, this sort of like informal hierarchy of, I have lived here for 20 years, I've lived here for 25 years, I was here at the, I occupied this space initially, so I have more experience, and we have tried certain things, and some things don't work and so on. So it can be discouraging. But I think now, having been part of this association for 5.5 years, it really comes down to the conversations that you have amongst one another. And it is an absolute practice. I am sometimes really struggling in our monthly meetings because I am noticing how I am struggling to articulate myself at times, that I feel like that my voice is stuck, and that because also, as I said, it's a ritual. So somehow it's like only afterwards do you then understand, oh, I actually wanted to have said that. But at the time, you're somehow in that trance-like state. It is something that I guess we are always in friction with somehow. And I guess that also is anywhere really the place. It's sometimes even like more helpful if there's a clear and very articulated hierarchical context given, because then you know what's up if it's something that you have to experience, and if that's something you have to observe over time, and to get your head around like how are the ties between people, and like who is who in that structure. That takes time, and it's I don't know, that's answering the question.
Yeah, I mean, I guess also the big difference here is that, as you said, it turned 30 years. So a lot of these structures that are in place probably grew and are maybe not kind of clearly stated or written down or anything. Maybe from a totally different
some people,
perspective.
for example, sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
But some people say like there are no rules in KuLe, and I always thought that was very confusing to me, because I think there are rules. So it really depends on how the people approach it. I guess we like to think of ourselves as non-dogmatic, but I don't know. I think there's a lot going on also underneath the surface.
Mm-hmm. In like, to have another example from BeAnother Lab, how would you describe your structures? I mean, you were both co-founding also the collective. How did you approach these questions?
I think it's to go back. I think Lewis's explanation of the different types of hierarchy was extremely clear. So there's not just, I guess, like the experience hierarchy is quite the obvious one, like who's been there longer, similar to what Lulu was saying. But I think another one is to do with the knowledge hierarchies that exist. Like people have expertise in different domains, so there's always a certain deferring depending on the role that everybody's taking in a project to where someone else is coming from. So the idea of a fixed hierarchy is quite flexible. It's more of a contextual hierarchy. And then it's not so much about imposing a particular will and more about following a particular inertia that might be there, that someone might find it easy to do a certain thing, or have experience to be able to navigate a certain context, or whether it's a cultural context, a language context, or funding application, or whatever it might be that you're involved in. And so they'll be making more decisions, so that the way we frame it is less about what the hierarchy is and who's in charge of making the decisions, and more just trying to give autonomy to people in the domains in which they feel comfortable having that autonomy. It doesn't mean there's no frictions. There is, of course, particularly I think that people also, as we develop the project, it's quite modular. There might be like 2 or 3 of us that travel to do a project in one place. Maybe there's 4 over here. Maybe there's 2 over there. And we end up with very different experiences from learning collectively with the people that we collaborate with in those contexts. So bringing that back into the collective and finding ways of sharing the knowledge and the experiences we have as well is something that's a continual challenge, I think, but is, I think, the way forward to finding ways of, as you're talking about, post-hierarchical ways of relating and organizing. It's more to do with that, with how to turn that into sharing and capacity building. And I'm trailing off here. Maybe Marte has something else to say. You're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry. No, I think that what Christian just said is really the most, the ways we attempt to overcome these hierarchies, but there are many implicit hierarchies involved in our work. And one that I really liked how it was verbalized was this, I think Louis mentioned that privilege involves learning from the ongoing learning in the practice or something like this. And I think this is something I never really thought of in such a way, and I think this is very clear, and this also sets some new implicit rules that are very difficult for people that are coming in. Just what Christian said before about sharing one single email account. We know the internal functioning of this just because we have a certain practice, but it's not something easy if you just join a group that shares a common email account by 9 people and just have to like figure out who's going to respond the next email. And this is of course a challenge for new people, and these sort of things do impose important hierarchies, I think.
Yeah, I already found it difficult to manage one email address with just one other colleague, so I don't even imagine how it is with 9 people. Maybe Louis, I mean, you have been introducing us a lot to a lot of theoretical reflections, but you yourself live also in a project, in a collective living and working project, running artist residencies, etc. So how do you maybe think about these kind of ideas of really going post-hierarchical, also from not from only from a theoretical, but also from a practice perspective?
Yeah, I think at first I would say that talking about these hierarchies and things is something where I think I can always contribute a lot if I talk to others and talk with others about their structures. But to see them in my own structure can be way more difficult sometimes while being involved that much. But in general, yeah, we run together a residency in the north of Brandenburg. So we are six collective members right now, and we live together and work together, and we are connected every day. And I would say in the practice, a lot of things get a bit more not that clear as they are in the theory, but I think things what I would say now are important for us is, for example, if we reorganize our tasks to see there's one thing which I find really important is the replaceability. If there are tasks which are taken over by certain people and no one else really could take them over anymore, or is too far from that, or there's knowledge missing, that we try to redistribute this task in a way that more people know what to do there. And I, for myself, like to have the task of always think of how to make myself replaceable in a collective structure, and how keep myself free of this responsibility which comes if you start something on your own, but think of this as a collective project where you are not that important to have the control over everything, or to really trust in what others do and all that kind of things. And looking back a bit, what do you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, because for me, one of the things that was always a big question mark, or becomes a question mark again now in these reflections, is responsibility, because we're talking about power structures and tasks and people doing stuff and making decisions. But I think what seems to be one of the issues or points where it becomes tricky is when you have decisions to make that are connected to responsibilities and to taking over then the consequences in case there are any. So how do you all deal with these questions? I mean, that in part you probably can how do you say that in English? You give them to a kind of a juridical construct. So you become an association or you become some other entity, legal entity, but not everything can be just related to that entity, right?
If I respond to that, I would say the legal entity is something which is really often over, or there's so much focus on the legal entity or how things are organized. But if we try to find collective solutions, then we will realize quite soon that there is no legal answer to it, because every association has a formal hierarchy and there's someone held accountable in the end. And how all those legal frames work in, I don't know how, if there's other, I don't know, but really, well, if there's countries where they have good legal forms for collectives, but in Germany, for sure, there's none. So there's always a hierarchy behind it and someone will be accountable. So I think it makes way more sense to focus on how you feel as a group and how you take these responsibilities to talk about things. What happens if something comes and someone has, if it's about being responsible for a lot of money or for certain things, to talk that through and have this certain trust in that you will deal with it together because you're connected with each other in that way.
Maybe expanding that question to Marte and Christian, because I think in a collective like BeAnother Lab, probably not only responsibility, but also authorship can be an issue.
Mm-hmm. I think with regards to us, most of the work we do is we try to take a back seat with our own authorship. It's normally the communities or the individuals that we're collaborating with to generate stuff. So that, I think, on one level solves some stuff. I think also there's a question of people's personalities as well. I don't think anyone in the team is particularly interested in being a star themselves of the thing. So the issue of authorship is quite fine to leave it mostly as the collective. In fact, we generally try to do that, even though we have quite different views and voices when we speak or work in different contexts. Regarding the formalization of a legal entity, we are formed as a legal entity. We had to do that a few years ago because of the scale of some of the projects we were involved in, and we're based in Catalonia in Barcelona, and they have quite a flexible structure with like a non-profit cultural association framework, and that works well. But as Lewis is saying, like in reality, it's different. It might be someone role on paper and so forth, but the reality of the everyday is it can be quite changeable. So understanding that and understanding that the institutionalization of something is a vehicle trying to carve out a bit of space so that you can work it out internally, not necessarily a solution to it.
Maybe if I may add, just to problematize a little bit more, I think another place in which we find these legal requirements for individuals rather than communities is funding. No, we often are in this situation where there is a specific funding where you can actually employ one person, and this, of course, creates or might create a difference in responsibilities, but mostly access to funds, which is, of course, a struggle that we go through as a collective, and which also, I think, in our case, more than authorship, I think if anything has at some point been an issue, or more than an issue, something that is difficult to solve is related to funding, to the time that some of us have invested, perhaps, or how some of us feel that we have invested maybe 5 years without getting a salary, and like these sort of situations are often causing frictions. So that out of the table.
Yeah, I didn't really hear the last sentence that you said. Something that called frictions, but I guess it was still related to funding issues and money. And I think that's definitely something I also, when I thought about like who to invite to this panel and about the discussion that we would have, that kind of questions that came up of how are such issues being resolved in structures that do not have the kind of usual hierarchies or ways of distributing money and distributing responsibilities, was that it reminded me a lot of other projects that I came across when reading about the degrowth movement. So kind of it seemed to have a lot of similarity, because it was, even if these projects clearly do not consider themselves as collectives, they had a similar approach, I think, to how to distribute work, how to distribute money, how to organize themselves, maybe not without hierarchies, but with the flattest or most horizontal possible hierarchies. I don't know, Luis, if that makes sense to combine or to compare degrowth and collective thoughts.
Yeah, maybe in the sense that if you have a collective structure and a collective project which tries to implement solidarity within and also to the outside, then I think there's a lot of projects and people which wouldn't go beyond they would pay everyone a salary which makes sense, but wouldn't go for the maximum profit. And maybe that's also, there is a connection to the degrowth, even if I would think that the degrowth movement, is on a others level more or less, and comes together maybe with collective structures and ideas from the left. So, but I think there's something about how you pay people, if you have pay everyone the same salary per hour, or if you distribute the money you have by needs, because there's certain people in the group which have more responsibilities for kids and other people, and there are others which don't need that much because their life situation is different. I think this is the two things: to not go for the maximum profit, and if you distribute your money by needs, or at least at the same salary per hour. But this, I think, is something which is, I think the most collectives would do that and wouldn't pay someone who's doing the AI programming 500 euros per day, and the others who read the emails just $20 per hour, something. I don't know.
Lulu, how does like in a structure as big as KuLe, how does it work with responsibilities and distributing both responsibilities and maybe also flows of, organizing flows of money?
So, I mean, there are a few, I mean, we are volunteering here. So, I'm not hired by this house to live here and to work here. So I have not received anything for my work in those last 5.5 years. There are certain tasks where you get like I guess like more of a symbolic amount paid for something such as general cleaning or doing the accounting and so on. But other than that, I guess in terms of responsibility, you put yourself forward to certain tasks. And then, some of the responsibilities are more complex, dealing with the owners, for example, and others are who takes out the organic trash once a week. But at the same time, they are also equally important. And so those tasks are being talked about in our meetings and then distributed. And sometimes people are doing them voluntarily, and sometimes people are asked to do them.
In terms of like, and the whole like keeping not housekeeping, but if there are constructions to be paid or damages to be repaid, things like that. Is this something that the collective has to provide for, or is that dealt with in another way?
There are certain things there are certain things that need to be paid by the owners of the house in terms of renovation, but then there's of course also certain aspects that we cover in terms of repair and renewal. And we have somebody taking care of that that lives in the house, and she is paid for that, which I find also very important. That nobody should do that for free. That's a lot of responsibility. The bookkeeping and the kind of overseeing. The radiator is not working. We need somebody, or the roof is collapsing. Somebody needs to come and have a look at that.
I'm just having a look. Oh, Luis wanted to say something, I think.
No, I think
right?
I think that's a really interesting part in general, is how a collective decides which work is. Or if it's in this close connection with working and living in a space, and you have care work and certain things which make sense to include, and others you exclude. And this inclusion and exclusion of work which belongs to the collective and has the same value as accounting and everything else, I think this is also something really interesting to look at, because for me that's always, or that's problems we also face, to decide, okay, this is out and this is inside. This is what you do in your free time, and this is care work which belongs to the whole community and is important, and you have to give it a value. I think that's something interesting.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we're slowly coming to the end of, we still have a little bit of time. I just wanted to already mention that, because in case there should be questions from the audience, feel free to send them to us in the chat. If not, for now, I would like to, one thing that I would like to hear from every one of you is, what would be your suggestions or your advice if people want to found a new collective? I mean, what are the things that you would want to make them aware of the most if they consider, for example, founding a collective in Berlin to run an art space or start an artistic practice together, something like that?
I guess very, very basic, just thinking probably, at least I think we struggle with it, and I mean, we all struggle with it all the time, I think still, but I think trying to order things in terms of priority, like spend more time listening than you do doing, and spend more time doing than you do talking, is probably the basic thing that I can think of.
Yeah, you should definitely be happy to listen instead of talking. Yeah, saying that, I give the word to Marte.
No, I just was going to say that I think for me, at least, I realized, and this is very personal, but not sharing a space, unlike, I'm sorry, it's KuLe? Yeah, KuLe, right? Where people are living together. And for me, this is quite a challenge, because I think we are friends in our collective. We are a group, we're a family in a way, and it's important to share other spaces that are not necessarily professional, and not only listening about, just sharing personal aspects of our personal life. I think brings us together, and we have very few opportunities to do that.
Lulu, what about you?
Well, I haven't founded one either. So I think that I assume that if you want to found a collective, that there's a certain momentum and a sort of certain energy driving you. And so I guess I would recommend to conserve that energy and that momentum and really let that drive you forward in doing that and being brave for the experience, and also understand that it's a process and it's a dynamic, and then at times it can be very frustrating, but at the end of the day it can also be very rewarding, and it is an experience on a scale or on a spectrum that you are continuously going back and forward.
Luis, what about you?
I think I would definitely go with Christian on the thing that it makes sense to do things, to do actions together, to collect experience what it means to do things together and know how other people do their things, and not only come together in this like if you are in Berlin and meet in a bar thinking about starting a collective and you talk the whole time about it, then things can get really abstract. And I think it makes really sense to do things together and know a bit how other people do their things. And then on the point of talking, I think something really important for me in being a collective is to establish a certain trust, which also comes with having experienced how others react in situations of conflicts and also in political questions. This is something which is always important for me to know a bit where the values and political guidelines of people are. And that's why I also think it's really important to talk about certain aspects and not assume that everyone has the same idea about it. For example, all the things around money, all the things about I don't know, yeah, but to not assume things you are really sure about how you want them, that it's the same by everyone else, and everyone else just saying, yeah, sure, we do it that way. But to come through that points, I think that's something really important, to really get an understanding what other people means by these important parts of collective work and values.
Yeah, me, for like not having gone through, I have never been part of a collective so far. I have only struggled, let's say, with either informal or hidden hierarchies. Maybe that's the part that I can connect to most from my personal experience. But I think what I take away from what you've all been telling is I think it needs kind of a will to a radical openness to things, to also be open to not having rules and living with this tension of maybe not having rules or not having clear guidelines for how things will be resolved. And what we probably all see as a challenge is to make ourselves replaceable, because I think our society and the way that we grow up and are socialized is all about not making yourself replaceable, but this kind of like extreme individualism and making yourself something very special and unreplaceable. Okay. I mean, maybe you have last comments before we close? Because so far there are no questions from outside.
Just what you said there about making yourself replaceable, which Luis was also talking about. I think it's maybe also a good way of thinking about it is making yourself replicatable. Like, so it's not less of a scarcity mentality, and think about, okay, how am what I involved in, or what am I doing that others could be doing as well. Not so much that I'm going to replace myself and step out entirely, but that other things that are similar could pop up, and how do I share what I do and how I do with that goal.
I would also maybe add something a bit more positive in the end, that even with all the difficulties in it, I think with in a collective sector you can find a lot of love, solidarity, and trust, and this gets you this can make your life way more free, and can replicate yourself in a really good way. I think I like the words.
And I would maybe add.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Is really trust in the process of a group. I mean, that's just a very ancient procedure to live in groups and to work in groups. And so you are part of a group. And so, yes, maybe on an individual levels, we have our inquiries, but then there's also a group like a collective group spirit somehow, or psyche that is at stake. And I like to trust that the group is also like a soul of itself that is moving forward, that I am a part of, so that that there are moments where the group comes first and I come second, and vice versa, and that this is a constant role change.
I agree very much with that, and I think it relates to my point, which is back to agency. And I think more and more I'm convinced that losing agency leads to very radical behaviors, and the absolute loss of agency is really what makes you have the more radical actions. And I'm not meaning radical in a necessarily or mostly positive way, but I think this is important, that the group has a certain, like the individuals have a certain degree of agency.
Yeah, I'm happy to end on these positive notes, that I actually didn't even see or didn't have radical openness or this kind of losing yourself in the group as something negative in mind, but I can understand that. I guess that's probably what causes fear, or causes, I don't know, insecurity in people when they hear about collectives and how they work, that this causes or can cause negative feelings. But anyways, I'm happy to end on a positive note, and I also am always very impressed when talking with people running different collectives, being part of, not running, but being part of different collectives, how much despite all the struggles that they seem to go through, always clearly have that, but this decision for and not against this type of working or living together. So with this, I want to say a big thank you to all of you for being part of this and sharing your insights and sharing your experiences and opening up doors to your collective work that probably usually are not so much part of such talks. So thanks a lot, and wishing you all a nice evening, and hope we all meet each other in real life again soon. So thanks a lot. And for everyone else, this was the last panel for today, and tomorrow we will continue with the last day of our program, and we hope to see many of you tomorrow. Bye-bye.